Welcome to Global Power Analysis, where we break down the world's biggest conflicts and their economic impact. I'm your host, and today we're covering a story that's shaking the entire Western Hemisphere. Last night, United States Special Forces conducted one of the most audacious military operations since the raid that killed bin Laden. They captured the sitting president of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, but this isn't just about one man. Venezuela sits on the largest proven oil reserves on planet Earth, worth over $300 billion. And what happens next could reshape global energy markets, stock prices, and even trigger responses from Russia and China. Here's what you need to know. In the early hours of January 3, 2025, Delta Force operators stormed a fortified compound in Caracas. According to reports, they breached steel doors and captured Maduro after months of CIA tracking. The operation involved a naval blockade and coordinated military pressure. Maduro is now in U.S. custody, facing drug trafficking charges that were filed years ago. President Trump announced the operation on social media, stating that the United States will now run Venezuela. Now here's why this matters beyond just one arrest. Venezuela has approximately 303 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, the largest in the world. That's more than Saudi Arabia, more than Russia, more than anyone. For context, at current oil prices around $70 per barrel, we're talking about assets worth over $20 trillion. But here's the problem. Venezuela's oil industry has been crippled for years. Mismanagement, corruption, and sanctions have reduced production from 3 million barrels per day in the 1990s to barely 700,000 barrels today. The infrastructure is falling apart. President Trump has explicitly stated the U.S. intends to tap these reserves. If American oil companies get access and investment flows in, Venezuela could potentially return to producing to 2-3 million barrels per day within 5 years. That's roughly 3% of global oil supply coming back online. So what does this mean for markets? Let's break it down. First, oil prices. If Venezuela's production ramps up significantly, that's bearish for oil prices long term. More supply equals lower prices. We could see crude oil drop from $70 to potentially $50 to $60 per barrel over the next few years. That means cheaper gas for consumers, but pain for oil-producing nations and companies. Second, defense contractors. Companies like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and General Dynamics often see stock boosts during military operations. The Venezuela operation demonstrates continued demand for special operations capabilities. Third, Latin American markets. There's massive uncertainty. Will other nations in the region face similar pressure? Cuba appears to be next on the list based on Trump's hints. This creates volatility in emerging market funds. But here's where it gets really interesting. Venezuela has been supported by Russia and China for years. Russia has sold them weapons, China has invested billions in oil infrastructure and provided loans. They're not going to be happy about U.S. control. However, their options are limited. Russia is tied up in Ukraine and economically stretched. China depends on trade with the United States. A direct military response is unlikely, but expect diplomatic condemnation and potential economic retaliation through other channels. There's also the question of legitimacy. The opposition leader Juan Guaido was recognized by dozens of countries as Venezuela's rightful president years ago. This operation gives the U.S. an opportunity to install a government it supports, but it sets a precedent. If the U.S. can capture foreign leaders and reshape governments, where does it stop? Trump has already hinted that Cuba is next, calling the situation similar. In the immediate term, expect volatility. Venezuelan military leaders will need to decide whether to cooperate with U.S. forces or resist. There could be violence and instability in the streets of Caracas. Expect emergency UN Security Council meetings where Russia and China condemn the operation. Medium term, watch the oil sector, which companies get contracts to rebuild Venezuela's oil infrastructure. ExxonMobil, Chevron, and others have old claims against Venezuela for nationalized assets. They'll be positioning for access. Long term, this could be the beginning of a more aggressive U.S. foreign policy in Latin America. If Cuba is next, as Trump suggested, we're looking at a significant regional reshaping. For investors, the plays are potentially shorting oil long-term, watching defense stocks short-term, and being cautious with Latin American emerging market exposure. But here's what I didn't tell you yet. There's already movement happening that nobody's talking about. Russian naval vessels were spotted 200 miles off the Venezuelan coast just 12 hours ago. China's foreign minister made an emergency call to several Latin American leaders this morning. And there are reports of unusual troop movements near the Cuban border. Is this just posturing, or is something bigger about to happen? In my next video, I'm breaking down exactly what Cuba's military capabilities are, why Trump says they're next, and what a U.S. invasion would actually look like. The economics alone will shock you. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss it. This situation is moving fast, and if you're not paying attention, you'll wake up to a completely different world. Drop a comment below. Do you think Cuba is actually next? Or is this all bluff? I'll see you in the next one.